Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune in to these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The dusk cloaks the old house in shadow as Clara trudges through the dusty halls, her flashlight wavering in her grip. Its beam slices through the gloom, searching for her brother, Levi, who vanished after a frantic call about a withered tapestry on the wall. His voice trembled with dread, the line cutting off mid-sentence, leaving only silence behind. The air hangs heavy with mildew and a faint sour rot, urging her deeper into the ruin. She clutches Levi's pocket knife, found glinting near a doorway, its blade warm against her palm. Drawing her onward, a rustle stirs the stillness, soft and unsteady, trembling the floor beneath Clara's boots. She pauses, sweeping the light across the corridor, its glow catching on peeling paint and a room where shadows cling thick and still. The rustle pulses, rhythmic and eerie, pulling her toward the chamber where the air grows colder. She calls Levi's name, her voice swallowed by the house, answered only by a faint, dry scrape from within. Her heart pounds, but she presses forward, the knife glinting in her grasp. The room reveals a tapestry, its threads faded and frayed, streaked with a dark, oily sheen that shimmers in the flashlight's beam. Clara's light trembles as she approaches, spotting Levi's scarf tangled in the fabric, its cloth soaked with that same sheen. The rustle deepens, thrumming through her legs, and she peers closer, the beam revealing a tear in the tapestry, its edges slick with a strange film. A whisper rises from the gap, slow and deliberate, and her stomach twists, dread rooting her in place. A shape flits beyond the room, swift and faint, vanishing as Clara swings the light. The scrape grows louder, joined by a hiss that slithers through the air, alien against the house's hush. She shouts for Levi, her voice faltering, and the hiss turns into murmur-soft, overlapping voices rising from the tear. She steps back, clutching the scarf, her boots scuffing the dust. The murmurs swell, blending with the rustle, a chorus pressing against her ears. She examines the tapestry, the light catching on its surface, littered with debris threads, cloth, bonesaw coated in that oily sheen. Clara's breath fogs as she spots Levi's ring, its band warped, woven into fabric. The murmurs sharpen, and a hand lunges from the tier, pale and clawing, scraping the threads before retreating. She stumbles back, the flashlight slipping, its beam spinning across the room, the rustle shaking the walls around her. Footsteps shuffle behind her, heavy and uneven, stirring the dust with each deliberate stride. Clara turns, the light trembling, glimpsing a figure tall, its form faded, its head tilted wrong before it melts into the shadows. The footsteps circle, closing in, and she bolts toward a trapdoor near the tapestry, clutching the ring, the murmurs rising into a scream that pierces the night. Shapes loom along the room's edges, their silhouettes swaying, too many to count, their presence a weight on the air. The trapdoor swallows her as she descends its ladder, the walls tight, the air thick with damp and decay. Her light flickers, illuminating gashes scratched into the wood, frantic, overlapping, stretching deeper as she goes. The scream echoes, joined by a dragging scrape that sends chills up her spine. She lands in a cellar, its ceiling low, its floor littered with fabric scraps that shimmer under the beam. Levi's coat lies in the center, soaked in sheen, surrounded by bones still wet with marrow. A figure crouches in the shadows, its form cloaked in tatters, its head bowed over a pile of threads. Clara's light shakes as she approaches, recognizing Levi's boots, but the figure turns, revealing a face that isn't his pale, eyeless, its mouth open in a silent wail. It lunges, and she swings the flashlight, cracking it against its skull, the bulb shattering, plunging the cellar into darkness. The scream surges, shapes shifting in the black, their claws scraping wood as they close in. She runs, hands groping for the ladder. The creatures pursue, their scrapes and drags filling the air, their faded forms pressing through the narrow passage. Clara claws upward, the wood splintering her palms, the coat slipping as she reaches the surface. She bursts into the room, the house alive with movement, figures swaying, their heads cocked, the scream a deafening roar. The walls tremble, the trapdoor widening, swallowing the floor as she flees, the gloom blurring around her. She trips, tumbling into the hall, the ring glinting beside her in the dust. Clara crawls free, the house endless under the shadowed sky, the rustle fading, the figures gone. Her flashlight lies broken, the ring clutched tight, its metal warm against her skin. A wanderer named Ruth finds her on the porch, soaked and muttering, the sheen still clinging to her hands. She tells her story at Ruth's camp, words spilling out about Levi and the tapestry, met with a furrowed brow as Ruth offers tea she doesn't drink. Ruth glances outside, the house's faint outline in the distance, and stays silent, her hands steady but pale. The next day, Clara leads Ruth and a tracker, Elias, to the house, but the trapdoor has vanished, the tapestry smooth, the bones and coat nowhere in sight. Elias sighs, suggesting exhaustion or a trick of the dusk, but his eyes linger on the ring, its sheen faintly pulsing in the light. Clara returns home, the apartment cold, Levi's scarf inexplicably on the counter, dry but heavy. Sleep evades her, the murmurs echoing in her ears, the sheen's chill lingering on her skin. Then she finds a note in Ruth's handwriting. "I wove it," slipped under her door. The lights dim one night and the rustle surges, rattling the walls. Clara grabs a knife, the ring glowing faintly, its sheen thrumming as shadows stretch across the room. The scream seeps through the floor, joined by thuds against the windows, the ceiling, the door. She barricades herself in, the knife raised, but the shadows thicken, hands pressing through the walls, pale and frayed. The windows crack, dust swirling inward, and the lights die, the murmurs drowning her cries. Morning breaks, the apartment empty, the knife on the floor, the ring and note gone. The door stands locked, the windows intact, despite the cracks. Clara vanished. A neighbor, old Mr. Finch, hears screams in the night, sees shapes slink toward the house, but the trackers find no tracks, only Ruth, standing in the room, staring at the tapestry with a haunted gaze. She mutters about Elias, her lost son, hinting the faded figure was him, woven into the threads she once crafted. The house grows still, but the rustle lingers, faint and persistent in the air. Ruth adjusts her coat, her hands steady as she steps away from the room, the sheen still clinging to her fingers. She recalls the day she wove the tapestry, Elias's laughter fading into the fabric, his voice now part of the murmurs. The room stands quiet, its walls unbroken, but the scrape persists, a reminder of the depths below. She walks on, the pocket knife Clara dropped glinting in her pocket, its warmth unsettling. Clara's absence weighs heavy, her footsteps erased from the house. Ruth reaches her camp, the fire low, the night pressing close around her. She pulls out the knife, its blade pulsing faintly, mirroring the rustle that follows her. The shadows shift, shapes swaying just beyond the firelight, their murmurs growing louder. She grips her own blade, its edge steady, but her eyes dart to the house, the tapestry calling her name. The tracker, Elias, had warned her once about the old ruin, his voice firm before he vanished. Ruth remembers his tales of the withered tapestry, its hunger for those who lingered too long. She shakes off the memory, but the rustle intensifies, the knife warm in her hand. The fire flickers, casting long shadows that twist and sway, their forms too familiar. Night deepens, and the rustle becomes a roar. shaking the ground beneath Ruth's feet. She drops the knife, its glow illuminating the dirt. The murmurs now, a scream in her ears. The shapes close in, their claws scraping the air, their faces faded yet grinning. She swings her blade, cutting nothing but shadow, the fire dying as the darkness swallows her camp. The house stands alone in the dusk, its tapestry sealed, its walls gleaming with fresh sheen. Ruth's coat lies abandoned, her blade buried in the soil, the pocket knife gone. The halls stretch on, their shadows long and still, whispering tales of lost souls and woven horrors. Clara's name joins Levi's in the stories, carried on the wind, a warning etched into the night shroud. The ruin waits, silent and patient, the withered tapestry's threads pulsing beneath the dust. The rustle persists, soft and inviting, beckoning the next wanderer who dares to touch its weave. Deep within the dense woods of Blackthorn Forest, an unsettling legend had lingered for centuries. Locals spoke in hushed tones about shadowy figures that roamed the trees at night, their whispers carrying secrets too dark to bear. No one dared venture into those woods after sunset except for Eleanor Grayson. A journalist by trade and skeptic by nature, she dismissed the tales as mere superstition, eager to disprove them once and for all. Eleanor arrived at dusk with her camera slung over her shoulder, a flashlight in hand, and a notebook tucked into her coat pocket. The air was thick with humidity, and the scent of damp earth filled her lungs. She stepped cautiously onto the forest trail, its narrow path illuminated faintly by moonlight, filtering through gnarled branches above. Each step crunched softly against fallen leaves, but the silence beyond unnerved her more than she cared to admit. As she pressed deeper into the forest, Eleanor began noticing strange details. Tree trunks twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that resembled faces frozen mid-scream. Shadows seemed alive, shifting subtly, even when no breeze stirred the canopy overhead. Her rational mind told her it was just tricks of the light or perhaps fatigue playing games, but unease coiled tightly around her chest nonetheless. Suddenly, a low whisper broke the stillness. It wasn't loud enough to understand words, yet it carried an eerie clarity, as though meant only for her ears. Stopping dead in her tracks, Eleanor spun around, shining her flashlight into the darkness behind her. Nothing moved, except her own trembling reflection bouncing off the beam's edge. "Hello?" she called out, her voice wavering despite herself. Silence answered. Determined not to let fear get the better of her, Eleanor continued walking, jotting notes furiously in her notebook. But the whispers grew louder, overlapping now, until they formed a cacophony of voices speaking simultaneously. They didn't sound human anymore. Instead, they were guttural, distorted, almost animalistic. Panic clawed at her throat, but curiosity rooted her feet firmly to the ground. What could be causing this? Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt distorted here, and Eleanor stumbled upon a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. At its center stood an ancient stone altar, cracked and weathered from years of neglect. Carvings covered every surface, depicting grotesque scenes of sacrifice and torment. Something about it drew her closer, despite every instinct screaming to flee. Kneeling beside the altar, Eleanor traced her fingers lightly over the carvings, shuddering at the coldness seeping into her skin. That's when she saw it, a name etched faintly into the base. Eleanor. Her breath hitched. How could this be? She'd never been here before, never heard of anyone else sharing her name who might have left such a mark. Yet there it was, undeniable proof staring back at her. A sharp gust of wind tore through the clearing, extinguishing her flashlight and plunging her into darkness. The whispers returned, louder this time, circling her like predators closing in on prey. Desperately, she fumbled for her phone, using its dim screen as a makeshift light. As she turned slowly, heart pounding wildly, she caught sight of something impossible, a figure standing just beyond the tree line. watching her silently. It wore tattered robes that billowed unnaturally without wind, and its face was featureless, smooth and blank, like polished marble. Despite having no eyes, Eleanor felt its gaze bore into her soul, rooting her to the spot. Paralyzed with terror, she couldn't look away, couldn't scream, couldn't move. Then, with deliberate slowness, the figure raised one skeletal hand and pointed directly at her. The gesture shattered whatever spell held her captive, and Eleanor bolted, crashing blindly through underbrush and tripping over roots in her haste to escape. Branches whipped at her face, tearing at her clothes, but she barely registered the pain. All she knew was the need to put distance between herself and that thing. Behind her, the whispers followed, growing louder with each passing second. Eventually, she burst free of the forest, collapsing onto the gravel road leading back to town. Gasping for air, she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting the figure to emerge from the shadows. Instead, the woods remained eerily silent, as though mocking her retreat. Shaken but alive, Eleanor resolved never to speak of what happened, not to colleagues, not to friends, not even to herself if she could help it. Weeks went by, and life returned to normal, or so she thought. One evening, while reviewing photos from her ill-fated expedition, Eleanor noticed something odd. In one shot taken near the altar, a figure stood partially hidden behind a tree. Its faceless visage stared straight at the camera, unblinking and malevolent. Her blood ran cold as she zoomed in, discovering another detail. Engraved faintly into the bark beside it was a single word: soon. Desperate for answers, Eleanor delved into local archives, uncovering old newspaper clippings about unsolved disappearances linked to Blackthorn Forest. Each victim shared a chilling similarity they'd all reported: hearing whispers before vanishing without a trace. And then she found it. A grainy photograph from decades ago showing 5 people gathered around the same altar. Squinting, Eleanor realized one of them bore an uncanny resemblance to herself. Her investigation led her to Margaret Halloway, the sole survivor of that fateful group. Now elderly and reclusive, Margaret reluctantly agreed to meet. Over tea in her dimly lit parlor, she recounted the horrifying truth. The forest chose its victims, drawing them in with visions tailored specifically to their fears and desires. Once marked, escape was impossible. Those who resisted longest suffered the most excruciating fate imaginable. "But why me?" Eleanor demanded, tears welling in her eyes. Margaret hesitated before answering. "Because you're not entirely human," she whispered. According to legend, certain individuals carried remnants of ancient spirits within them, making them prime targets for the forest's insatiable hunger. Eleanor recoiled, refusing to believe such nonsense. Yet deep down, doubts gnawed at her resolve. That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor sat alone in her apartment, staring blankly at the photo of the altar. Suddenly, her phone buzzed on unknown number, flashing across the screen. Against better judgment, she answered. Static crackled briefly before a familiar voice spoke, low and guttural. "We've waited long enough." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Over the next few days, strange occurrences plagued her waking hours. Doors slammed shut on their own, shadows flickered erratically, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. Desperation drove her back to Margaret, begging for guidance. The old woman handed her a small vial containing murky liquid. "Drink this," she instructed solemnly. "If you truly wish to break free, you must confront your other self." Armed with newfound resolve, Eleanor ventured once more into Blackthorn Forest. This time, however, she felt strangely detached, as though guided by forces beyond her control. Reaching the altar, she poured the contents of the vial onto its surface. Reciting incantations Margaret had taught her, The ground trembled violently, and the air grew thick with sulfuric stench. From the darkness emerged two figures, the faceless entity and another woman identical to Eleanor in appearance, yet radiating pure malice. Their eyes locked, recognition dawning simultaneously. "You cannot escape destiny," the doppelganger hissed, lunging forward. Chaos erupted as both women grappled fiercely, neither gaining the upper hand. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, Eleanor remembered Margaret's final warning: destroy the source. Summoning every ounce of strength, she grabbed a jagged rock nearby and hurled it at the altar. With a deafening roar, the structure shattered, releasing a blinding surge of energy that engulfed everything. When consciousness returned, Eleanor found herself lying amidst charred remains of the forest, sunlight streaming warmly overhead. Relief washed over her until she noticed something peculiar. On her wrist, freshly carved initials gleamed ominously. In the fog-laden streets of Ravenshire, a small coastal town steeped in mystery, there stood an ancient clock shop that no one dared enter after sundown. The locals whispered about Elias Thornfield, the reclusive clockmaker who had vanished decades ago, leaving behind only his peculiar creations clocks, said to tick backward and chime at irregular intervals. Some claimed the clocks were cursed, their mechanisms harboring secrets too sinister for mortal minds. Among those intrigued by the legend was Clara Whitmore, a historian with a penchant for uncovering forgotten tales. She dismissed the rumors as mere folklore, but couldn't resist the allure of solving the enigma surrounding Elias Thornfield. Armed with her notebook and flashlight, she approached the decrepit shop late one evening, its windows darkened by grime and cobwebs. The sign above the door read, "Thornfield Timepieces, where time stands still." Pushing open the creaking door, Clara stepped inside, greeted by the faint hum of ticking clocks echoing through the dusty air. Shelves lined the walls, each crammed with timepieces of every shape and size. Some were ornate, others simple, yet all shared one unsettling trait: they moved counterclockwise. As she wandered deeper into the shop, a strange sensation prickled her skin, as though unseen eyes tracked her every move. Her attention was drawn to a large grandfather clock standing in the corner, its pendulum swinging erratically despite appearing unwound. Intrigued, Clara leaned closer, noticing intricate carvings etched into its wooden frame. Among them was a name repeated over and over: Elias. Beneath it, scrawled hastily, were dates spanning centuries. Her pulse quickened. Could these be records of lives lost? Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the ticking slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm. From the shadows emerged a figure clad in tattered robes, his face obscured beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His voice rasped like rusted gears grinding together. "You shouldn't have come here." Startled, Clara stumbled back, dropping her flashlight. Its beam flickered wildly before dying completely, plunging the shop into near-total darkness. "What do you want?" she stammered, clutching her notebook tightly. Instead of answering, the figure extended a skeletal hand, pointing toward the grandfather clock. Against her better judgment, Clara obeyed, approaching it cautiously. As she did, the carvings seemed to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns. One phrase stood out starkly: "Beware the 13th hour." Before she could decipher more, the clocks erupted in discordant chimes, filling the shop with deafening noise. Panicked, Clara bolted for the exit, only to find the door sealed shut. Desperation mounting, she searched for another way out, discovering a hidden staircase descending into pitch-black depths below. With no other options, she descended, guided solely by the faint glow of her phone screen. At the bottom lay a cavernous workshop illuminated by dim lanterns. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, and half-finished clocks littered workbenches. In the center stood a massive mechanism unlike anything Clara had ever seen. It pulsed rhythmically, emitting a low, ominous thrum. Surrounding it were shelves filled not with tools or parts, but with glass jars containing what appeared to be human hearts suspended in amber liquid. A sudden movement caught her eye: a journal, resting atop a nearby table. Flipping through its pages, Clara uncovered Elias Thornfield's writings. He spoke of experiments meant to manipulate time itself, binding souls to his creations to power them. But something went wrong. The process became uncontrollable, consuming anyone who interacted with the cursed clocks. Horrified, Clara realized the truth: the clocks weren't just artifacts, they were prisons. As she absorbed this revelation, the temperature plummeted further, and the lights began to flicker. From the shadows emerged the robed figure again, now accompanied by others identical to him. Their faces remained obscured, but their movements were synchronized, mechanical even. They advanced slowly, surrounding her until escape seemed impossible. Clutching the journal, Clara backed toward the massive mechanism, searching desperately for a way to disable it. Her fingers brushed against a lever marked with the same warning she'd seen earlier: "Beware the 13th hour." Without hesitation, she pulled it. The machine groaned loudly, gears grinding violently as sparks flew everywhere. The figures froze mid-step, then collapsed into lifeless heaps. But victory was short-lived. Above her, the clocks resumed their chaotic chiming, louder than ever. A deep, resonant voice boomed throughout the chamber. "Foolish child, you've awakened me." Turning, Clara saw the sorcemonstrous entity formed entirely of interlocking clockwork parts. Its face bore resemblance to Elias Thornfield, twisted into an expression of eternal rage. "You dare tamper with my masterpiece?" it growled, advancing menacingly. Clara scrambled backward, tripping over debris. Just as the creature reached for her, she noticed something glinting amidst the Rekagia key dangling from a chain around its neck. Summoning courage she didn't know she possessed, she lunged forward, snatching the key and jamming it into the mechanism's core. The reaction was instantaneous. The entire workshop shook violently as the machine imploded, sucking everything, including the creature, into a vortex of whirling metal and fractured time. When the chaos subsided, Clara found herself alone in the ruins of the shop, sunlight streaming through shattered windows. Relief washed over her until she noticed the pocket watch clutched in her hand. Its hand spun wildly before settling on 13 o'clock. A soft whisper echoed in her ear. "Well done, Clara. Now we begin anew." Over the following weeks, strange occurrences plagued her daily life. Clocks malfunctioned around her. Strangers called her by unfamiliar names, and reflections showed glimpses of someone or something else staring back. Consulting Margaret Halloway, a renowned expert on temporal anomalies, Clara learned the horrifying truth. By destroying the mechanism, she hadn't ended the curse. She had become its new vessel. Margaret offered grim advice. To sever the connection, you must confront your predecessor. Find the mirror he used to trap himself within time. Following cryptic clues, Clara eventually located the artifact hidden in an abandoned lighthouse. Gazing into its surface, she saw not her reflection, but Elias Thornfield, gaunt and desperate. "You think you can escape?" he sneered. "We are bound forever." Enraged, Clara smashed the mirror, shattering both it and her own image. Darkness consumed her vision, and when she awoke, she stood once more in the clock shop, but this time, robed figures bowed before her. On her lips formed words, not her own: "Let time stand still." And so, the cycle continued.